In this video, I'm going to demo debugging a Python application which uses the Stripe API to collect payments for music lessons as a teacher. Okay, so you can select a teacher, and when you press create payment, it's supposed to take you to the checkout page. So imagine that we're testing this application as a test engineer, for example. So we can increment the number of hours. So let's say we want 3 hours of tuition or 2 hours of tuition, and the price changes accordingly. So that's working, we've validated that. And then we select the teacher, there's only one to select. And now we go to complete payment. I'll just close this window. Okay, so we expect it to take us to the payment page. And nothing happens. So we need to investigate what's going on there. So let's look at the network to see what's happening between the client and the server. So we'll look at the network tab. This is the same on Chrome. If you use Chrome, they have a dev tools. And I'll press that again, and I'll look at the responses. So 200 means good, and we see here we've got a 403, which is an error response code. So we've got a forbidden. So let's look at the response that we got from that. And we can see, okay, we've got an unsupported operand for none type and string. So this server is implemented in Python. So in Python we've got a none type and there's a string type, and something's trying to concatenate or sum together, a none type and a string. So let's have a look at the server and try and work out where this is happening. We can see that the URL is create checkout session, so that's the path that it tried to load. So it's trying to go to, if I hover over that there, it might show me the URL. There we go, so it's going to localhost on port 4242 create checkout session. So let's try and find that file in the server. So I'm going to open the server Python file, and I think it was called create checkout session. I'll just turn on line numbers so we can see where we're doing. So on line 42 we've got that happening. Okay, so now I'm going to use the Python debugger to step through the code as it's happening. Import PDB and PDB set trace. So the next time this code runs, it will stop on line 44 and pause and wait for us to step through the code, and we can work out what's happening. Somewhere it's trying to add two things together, and it's not able to do that because the type is none. Okay, so we've got the server running in the background here, and then on the right hand side I'm going to perform that request again, and the Python code is going to wait for my input. Oh, it didn't wait. I must have put it in the wrong place. So we still got the 403. So let's check that again. So this is a post request. Trying to find the server again. Create checkout session. Create check. So what I'll do is I'll stop the server and start the server again. There we go. Press it again. There we go. Now we can see that the request is waiting for us to inspect what's going on. So we've got no response yet, it's just waiting for the request until we respond. So if I move this window up, let's try and work out where that's happening. So we're currently on this step in the code, and I'll press N to go to the next line. So now we've performed that action, and we can look at the data variable, and we can see that we've got quantity 2, and that's the account ID for Stripe. So that looks good, there's nothing wrong there. And we'll keep stepping through. So we go next, next, so it's got domain URL. Let's check what the value for that is. That's null. So what's the type of that? We can see that's a none type. That's similar to the error that we saw, so I'm wondering if that's got anything to do with it. And let's look at the quantity. Quantity looks fine. What about the base price? Oh, that's not defined yet because we've not got to that point in the code yet. So we're currently on line 48. So if we press next, Python is going to go next and execute that line. So now we've got that variable defined. There we go. This arrow here tells us where the Python code is currently up to. So if we go look again, we can see we're currently on line 50 and it's going to try and create a new checkout session. And this is where we want it to go, and for some reason it's not getting there. And remember that that domain URL is of type none. So I suspect that's what the error is. And on line 55, what do we see? We've got success URL equals domain URL plus success. So if we keep going next, here we go, Python is about to execute that. It's trying to just trying to combine together two variables. This one is of type none, because we know that the type of domain URL is none. Let's just confirm that again. Type domain URL is none, and the type of this, because it's surrounded by quotes, is of course a string. And concatenating those two things together does not work. So if we have Python, for example, we have a string called hello, and we try and concatenate that with nothing, with none. It says we cannot concatenate that. So we found the error. So we need to set the domain URL. Now, because I'm familiar with Flask, I know that what we need to do to correct that is change that to the web address of this application. So we can do request.host URL. That's what the value should be set to, because then when that connects to that, we should combine this with that to fix it. So let's just run through the code and see the error. There we go, the error happened. Let's fix the code now. So we know that the domain URL is what's wrong. Here it is. So that is not set in the settings. So we need to correct that by changing it to the request URL. Request host URL. There we go. And then that will combine the actual web address with this code here. So now let's run that again, and hopefully the checkout will actually run this time. So I'll refresh the page. And when I press this complete payment button, then I expect it to go to the checkout. So I'm going to press it after 3, 2, 1, press. It pauses on the breakpoint that we set in the debugger. And then we're going to go, here's our new code where we get the host URL. So let's check the value of that. Great, the value of that is the website, which is the same as this one up here. Great. Okay, and now we're going to get to that point where it creates the success URL. So it's going to create a concatenation of this variable domain URL and this string. So if we allow it to do that, we don't get the error anymore, which is fantastic. So let's inspect the success URL. Success URL is not defined. Oh, I need to go next first. Success URL. Oh, we need to let it run its course. Okay. We could run it manually by just going like this. There we go. Ah, interesting. That's the cancelled URL. What we want is the success URL. There we go. So it's creating this URL. And I can see that there's already a bug that I've created here. So we've concatenated this string with this string, which isn't a very valid URL because we've got a double slash here. So I'm just going to correct that as well, because I don't think that that will be supported, because it's got 2 slashes next to each other and that's an invalid URL. Some web servers will allow that, but some will not, depending on the code. Okay, so let's take off that from there. There we go. Now just restart the application. Rerun the application. Oh, port 4242. There we go. And refresh. And now press the complete payment button. Step through the code. Okay, so here it's going to create that success URL. Let's just validate what that comes out as. Great. And now we have a valid URL, and we do not have that double slash because we removed it from here. So it's combining the domain URL, which it gets from the request host URL, and then combines it with this string here. And then we allow that to continue with the continue word. And as expected, we get directed to the checkout page. So we fixed the bug. Excellent. So that's a good example of using the Python debugger to test a web application and use the inspection of the types to work out what type the variables are to try and work out what the cause of the bug is.